"Sir, please. Please just let me work off the debt." Richard Whitmore III didn't even answer at first, simply paused mid-shuffle, his diamond cufflinks glittering under the chandelier as he looked up from his thick stack of poker chips. Then slowly, deliberately he laughed. A cold, slicing laugh that bounced off the glass walls of the penthouse like mockery made physical. "Work it off?" he repeated, letting the words drip with theatrical disbelief. "A black cleaning lady paying back $15,000? He shook his head with a smirk sharpened by privilege. "Your kind can barely count to 10. He stood tall, broad, arrogant, towering over Denise in her faded, bleach-stained cleaning uniform. She looked small next to him, but she didn't bow. She stood straight, even though her knees trembled. 12 years mopping my floors," he sneered. 12 years shuffling in here like you belong. You don't." His lip curled with contempt as he inhaled sharply. "You smell like bleach. Poverty." Executives chuckled behind him, drinks in hand, cigars burning. The sound of their laughter was a punch to the chest. Someone lifted a phone, recording hungry for viral humiliation. Security guards stood with folded arms, stone-faced, as if cruelty was just another form of entertainment. Then he went further lower than any man with power should ever go. "And that boy of yours," he said, tilting his chin toward the small silhouette in the doorway, in his little ghetto hoodie. His voice hardened. "He'll end up just like you, serving people like me, forever." The executives roared with laughter. Denise swallowed hard, fighting tears. Beside the door, a 10-year-old black boy, small, quiet, terrified, went completely still. His hands twisted around the straps of his backpack, knuckles white. He watched his mother be stripped of dignity in real time, piece by piece. But here's what none of them knew. That ghetto kid, that small, silent boy with taped glasses and a hoodie 2 sizes too big, was about to sit at that poker table and in one impossible hand, take everything from the richest man in the room. To understand how the night exploded, you must understand the two worlds that were silently colliding. World 1. Power 63 floors above Manhattan, the Whitmore Capital penthouse wasn't. Just luxurious, it was a temple built for the ego of one man. Leather chairs imported from Italy, crystal decanters filled with scotch older than most countries' independence. Hand-rolled Cuban cigars arranged like trophies. At the center, a private poker room illuminated by golden downlights, complete with custom mahogany tables and green felt imported from Monaco. On the walls hung glossy photographs of Richard Whitmore III shaking hands with senators, celebrities, tech billionaires, proof of the world that bent for him. In a glass case near the bar, 3 trophies gleamed proudly, amateur poker circuit championships. Richard's favorite possessions, monuments to victories he believed made him a god among gamblers. He wasn't just rich, he was 3rd-generation rich, born on a silk pillow, carried through life. His grandfather built the empire. His father doubled it. And Richard? He never earned $1. He only inherited the privilege to crush people beneath his shoes. Cruelty, not poker, was his finest skill. World 2. 5 miles north, a life built from nothing 5 miles away in Harlem. The atmosphere was completely different. A 5th-floor walk-up with no elevator. Cracked windows that let winter cut straight through the room, and radiators that clanked like rusty ghosts. The kitchen table was a battlefield of library books. Folding chair patched with duct tape served as the family's throne. The walls were bare except for a single framed photograph, a black man in a military uniform holding a worn deck of cards. This was Preston Foster's world. Preston, 10 years old, tiny for his age, so tiny bullies saw him as a target. Quiet to the point of invisibility. Glasses held together with tape. Clothes from the Goodwill bin washed and pressed because his mother insisted on dignity even when life stripped everything else from them. Yet his grandfather's eyes, dark, observant, catching every detail. Eyes that saw more than any 10-year-old should. His mother, Denise Foster, 42, cleaned floors, toilets, and boardrooms at Whitmore Capital for 12 brutal years. Night shifts, weekends, holidays, 12 years of scrubbing toilets used by men who earned more in a minute than she made in a month. Her hands were rough. Her back ached. But she never complained, not once, because she believed her son deserved more. A scholarship. A future. A way out. But Denise didn't know. Couldn't have known. That Preston had already found a different way out. The legacy of a card sharp 3 years earlier, Preston's grandfather, William Foster, had taught him real poker. Not childish games, Texas Hold'em, probability, misdirection, reading human behavior down to the twitch of a muscle. William had been a Korean War veteran, a black soldier from Alabama who learned poker the hard way, in smoky barracks, where white soldiers refused to let him sit until they needed a fourth player. That night, 19-year-old William won 6 months of their wages in a single brutal session. They beat him bloody for it, called him a cheater, broke 2 ribs, split his lip. But they couldn't take back the knowledge he'd earned. After the war, he played underground games in Chicago back rooms, basement clubs, places where a black man could play for stakes that mattered. He won enough to buy a house, lost it to a con man who stacked the deck. The game was honest, William always told Preston. It was the world that cheated. Cancer took him when Preston was 7. But in those last years, he poured every secret he knew into his grandson, every formula, every tell, every method for controlling emotion under pressure. And Preston? Preston surpassed him. 10, he calculated pot odds faster than grown men did simple addition. Could spot a bluff from a micro-expression, twitch a heartbeat. Preston didn't just understand cards, he understood people. It's the rhythm of breathing, micro-hesitations, the way someone's fingers twitched toward their chips. These were sentences to him, and he'd been fluent long before he knew it had a name. He had what gamblers whispered about with reverence, the gift, an instinct so sharp it felt supernatural. For the past 2 years, he had been playing online under the username Ghost12, a shadow presence that terrified the national poker forums. No one knew his real identity. No one knew he was a child. All they knew was that Ghost12 had quietly climbed into the top 200 players in the entire country, outplaying lawyers, doctors, Wall Street traders, and professional gamblers who had decades more experience and egos far larger than their skill. He played in silence, on a cracked $30 pawn shop tablet that flickered every few minutes. His mother never knew. She'd forbidden gambling after seeing it hollow out her father's generation, turning gifted men into ghosts of themselves. So Preston played in secret, late at night, under a blanket to hide the glow of the screen. He wasn't chasing money. Online sites didn't allow minors to gamble for real cash. He was chasing something far heavier. He was keeping a promise. Now, back in the penthouse, a world built for predators, Richard Whitmore III stood at the center, like a king surveying peasants. 58 years old, silver hair perfectly sculpted, a $5,000 suit molded to his arrogant frame, and a Rolex that cost more than Denise's entire year of labor. Around him, the usual Saturday night circus had gathered. Junior executives trying to impress the boss. Hedge fund managers sipping 12-year whiskey like liquid confidence. Security guards pretending to be stoic while tracking every movement. Near the window stood Eleanor Davis, silent, razor-eyed, Richard's executive assistant for 5 years. She had seen corruption, fraud, affairs, cruelty, documented everything. She said nothing, ever. Not because she was loyal, but because she was waiting. Waiting for the moment when silence would become the deadliest weapon in the room. By the elevator stood James Wilson, weekend security guard, 60 years old, former Detroit card shark with decades of street-level poker experience. One look at Preston's posture, his stillness, and James already knew something the others did not. The smallest person in the room might be the most dangerous. Vincent Taylor, the concierge with 80,000 TikTok followers, had his phone out before anyone else. His specialty? Catching rich people acting like caricatures of themselves. And tonight, he could smell a viral moment forming like thunder. And then there was Thomas Whitmore, 28, Richard's only son, pale, quiet, a walking apology. Years of public humiliation had carved his spine into a permanent slump. He stood at the bar, fingers tight around a whiskey he didn't want, watching his father tear a woman apart. Shame burned up his throat. This was the stage. These were the players. And in the middle of this golden, poisonous world stood a 10-year-old boy in a thrift store hoodie. Watching his mother fall apart, Preston touched his wrist. The watch. His grandfather's cheap Timex stopped permanently at 3:42, the exact moment William Foster exhaled his final breath. Preston had promised him he'd play, promised he wouldn't hide forever. Tonight, in the last place anyone would expect, against the worst type of man, Preston Foster was about to honor that promise. He just didn't know it yet. Richard wasn't finished humiliating Denise. He was only warming up. He circled her like a predator, eyes gleaming with cruelty. A broken wine bottle lay on the floor, a $4,000 Chateau Margaux. Shattered, the red wine spreading across the custom poker felt like a fresh bloodstain. $15,000, Richard said loudly, savoring every syllable.
That's savory.
The wine, the felt, emotional distress. Denise opened her mouth, voice cracking. "Sir, I don't have you're fired." He said it the way someone orders a coffee, casual, effortless, heartless, "and I'll make sure you never clean another building in Manhattan." How does that sound? Preston watched her shoulders collapse. 12 years of service, 12 years of sacrifice, 12 years of swallowing insults that pierced like needles. Gone instantly because a rich man felt bored. Something ignited in Preston's chest, hot, sharp, dangerous. Richard finally looked at him, really looked at him. "This is your son?" He stepped closer, examining Preston like a stain. "The one who's supposed to make it out of the ghetto?" Preston stayed silent. His grandfather had taught him, silence is a weapon. Use it wisely. He doesn't talk much, does he? Richard mocked. Smart. Nothing intelligent to say anyway. Probably gets that from you. Executives laughed on command, trained applause. Then Richard paused. A new idea flickered behind his eyes. The type of idea that only men drunk on power mistake for genius. "Actually," he said slowly, "I'm feeling generous tonight." He gestured to the gleaming mahogany table, the perfect green felt, the towers of chips stacked like miniature skyscrapers. One hand, Texas Hold'em, your son against me. Denise stepped forward immediately, planting herself between them. "No, absolutely not. Let me finish." Richard lifted a hand, Rolex glinting like a threat. "If the boy wins, your debt disappears. All 15,000. Plus, you keep your job. I'll even throw in a bonus." He let the room absorb the poison. "If he loses, you owe me 30,000, and you work for free until it's paid off. Could be years, could be forever." Even Richard's loyal audience shifted uncomfortably. A 10-year-old? A bet against a child? "He's 10 years old," Denise whispered. "And this should be quick," Richard said brightly, sliding into his chair. He shuffled the deck with performative mastery. "Think of it as a life lesson. Some people are born to sit at the table. Others are born to clean it." Eyes turned, phones lifted. The room held its breath. Preston didn't look at the executives or the security guards. He didn't hear their whispers or predictions. He was looking at the cards. 52 cards. Probability, strategy, psychology. A battlefield where skin color, age, and wealth meant nothing. His grandfather's voice echoed through memory. "The cards don't care about your skin color, boy. Only what's in your head and what's in your heart." Preston touched the stopped watch. At 3:42. Then he walked to the table. "Preston, no," Denise begged, reaching for him. "It's okay, Mom." His voice was soft, steady, old. "I'll play. But before we see what happened next, before we watch the impossible unfold, you need to understand where Preston learned to play. You need to understand the promise." 3 years earlier, a Harlem kitchen, summer heat pressing through windows that didn't close. William Foster sat at the table, a worn deck of cards balanced between his arthritic fingers. William Foster was 75 years old, an oxygen tank humming weakly beside him. Each breath, a battle that rattled through his chest like broken glass. But when he touched a deck of cards, the years melted. His hands stiff, swollen, trembling from age, became impossibly steady, fluid, graceful. When he shuffled, it looked like a pianist returning to an instrument he loved more than life itself. 7-year-old Preston sat across from him, chin on the table, wide-eyed, absorbing every flick of his grandfather's fingers like scripture. "Poker ain't about the cards," William said, dealing 2 hands face down. That was the sentence that rewired Preston's entire life. That's the first thing you need to understand. Most people think it's about luck, about getting good cards. They're wrong. Preston leaned in. "Then what's it about, Grandpa?" William's smile was tired but wise, the kind of smile carved by decades of scars and survival. "It's about the person holding them. their fears, their hopes, their tells. He tapped one gnarled finger against his temple. You learn to read people, you can beat anyone. I don't care if they've got pocket aces and you've got nothing. If you can see inside their head, you win. How do you see inside their head? You watch their eyes? Do they look at their chips when they're strong or when they're weak? Their hands? Do they tremble when they're bluffing or when they're excited? Their breath? Their posture? William leaned forward, voice dropping like a secret passed through generations. People can't help telling the truth, Preston. Their bodies betray them every single time. You just gotta learn to listen. And Preston listened. Harder than he'd ever listened to anything in his life. Over the next year, William poured everything he knew into Preston. To pot odds, implied odds, position, hand ranges, board textures, bet sizing, bluff frequency, fold equity. They practiced with dried beans as chips, a cardboard box as a card protector, the old kitchen table functioning as their casino. No fancy equipment, no expensive courses, just a dying man passing down a lifetime of knowledge to a boy hungry to learn. But beyond the math, beyond the technique, William taught something deeper, something carved from black history, black pain, and black brilliance. Your great-great-grandmother was born into slavery, William said one evening as the orange Harlem sunset bled through dirty windows. Couldn't read, couldn't write, couldn't own nothing. Not even herself. Preston swallowed. What did she have then? William tapped his temple again, her mind. Nobody can chain what's in here. Nobody can take it. Nobody can buy it. It's yours. The only thing in this world that's truly yours. He told stories, not fairy tales, but war stories of survival. About the army. About the night he won 6 months' wages off white soldiers who assumed a black kid from Alabama didn't understand probability. About the beating that followed and how he said he'd do it again. About underground games in Chicago where the smoke was thick, the danger thicker. About being a black man with money in 1950s America, a death sentence if the wrong people noticed.
Ow!
About the house he bought. About the con man who stole it with a crooked dealer in a marked deck. The game was honest, William always told him. It was the world that cheated. Then he'd smile, a soft, weary, unbreakable smile. But I'd rather live in an honest game with cheaters than a crooked world where everybody pretends to be fair. One night near the end, William was too weak to sit at the table. The oxygen tank hissed softly, the room dim, still final.
Hey.
Preston sat beside his grandfather's hospital bed holding the old man's hand, terrified to blink in case he missed the last moment. I never got to play where it was fair, William whispered, voice fading. No crooked decks, no rigged rooms. Just pure cards, pure math, pure skill. He pressed something into Preston's palm, a cheap old watch, scratched, faded, the kind you'd find at a drugstore decades ago. I taught you everything I know, William breathed, but you're better than I ever was. You see things I couldn't see. Tears streamed down Preston's cheeks. Promise me, William said, barely audible. When you sit at a table, a real table where it matters, you remember the cards don't lie, people do. Trust the math. Trust your eyes. And never, ever let anyone tell you what you're worth. I promise, Grandpa. William Foster died at 3:42 a.m. on a Tuesday morning. The watch stopped at that exact moment. Never would. Now, 3 years later, that silent, frozen watch sat on his wrist as he faced Richard Whitmore across a gleaming penthouse poker table. The executives saw a poor kid in a second-hand hoodie. Richard saw prey. None of them saw the truth. Preston Foster was a promise keeper, and promise keepers are dangerous. Richard dealt the cards himself, a power move, a flex, a way of declaring the deck belonged to him. 2 cards slid toward Preston, 2 toward Richard. The room had gone quiet, too quiet. Even the executives felt the shift. This wasn't entertainment anymore. This was history repeating itself. This was a battlefield. Vincent Taylor angled his phone, live stream jumping past 3,000 viewers as comments exploded across the screen. Let me explain the rules, Richard said, dripping condescension. Since I am sure they don't teach Texas Hold'em in whatever public school you attend. Preston didn't respond. He still hadn't looked at his cards. He was doing exactly what his grandfather taught him, watching. Richard's posture, relaxed, leaning back, confident, predictable, his breathing slow but hitching slightly when excitement crept in, because Richard Whitmore III had spent his whole life playing against people who feared him. He had never sat across from someone who didn't. When Richard was confident, he sat back and spread his arms. Preston saw it instantly. Like William said, the cards don't lie. People do. When Richard was nervous, he touched his chips before betting, a tiny self-soothing gesture. He probably didn't even know he did. When he was bluffing, his left eye twitched. Just once, like a glitch in confidence. Preston picked up every signal in under 30 seconds. Decoded, stored, weaponized. "You gonna look at your cards?" Richard asked, smugness dripping off every syllable. "Or are you too scared?" Preston finally lifted the corners of his cards the way his grandfather taught. Minimal movement, no readable reaction. 7 of spades, 8 of spades. Suited connectors. It's not glamorous, not intimidating, but extremely playable for someone who understood what the game truly was. His grandfather's voice echoed in his mind. "Cards are 30%. Richard peeked at his hand. His body shifted slight, leaned back, relaxed shoulders. The half-smile of a man who'd just unwrapped a Christmas present. Preston recognized it instantly. Big cards. Probably asking. Maybe ace-queen. The kind of hand that made amateurs feel invincible. And made professionals smell opportunity. "I'll start," Richard said, sliding forward $5,000 like it was pocket change. A ripple of murmurs rolled across the penthouse. He wanted to intimidate. To crush the kid before a single community card appeared. Preston didn't blink. He simply pushed his chips forward. He'd expected a fold, expected tears, expected a stereotype. Preston sat still as stone. The dealer exhaled and laid down the flop. 4, -5, -6. Preston didn't move, but inside his brain exploded into motion. Open-ended straight draw, plus a flush draw. At 8 cards to complete the straight. 9 more to complete a flush. More than half the deck that favored him by the river. Against Richard's likely a king. Preston was winning, mathematically, decisively, undeniably. But Richard blind, arrogant bet again. $8,000. And then it came, the chip touch. The tell. He's scared. His grandfather's voice whispered, "When a man bets strong, he's weak." Preston counted the odds. 32% on the turn, 54% by the river. The numbers aligned like stars. He didn't blink. All in, a champagne glass shattered somewhere in the room, but no one looked. Every pair of eyes locked on the 10-year-old who had just shoved his entire life into the center of the table. "What did you say?" Richard barked. "All in? $30,000? His mother's debt? His grandfather's dream?" The penthouse went silent. The dealer's trembling hand placed the turn card. 9, Preston's straight hit with the force of divine justice. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. He stayed expressionless, but inside, fireworks detonated behind his ribs. Richard studied the board, clueless. "I can still win," he declared. Even with top pair, he'd be drawing dead. His ego blinded him to the truth, and his ego was about to bury him. The river card waited. The entire penthouse waited. Preston sat like a sculpture, wearing the dead man's watch of the grandfather who taught him how to destroy men exactly like this. Richard had already written the script in his mind. Rich man crushes poor child, balance restored, natural order reaffirmed. But reality was about to light that script on fire. He started talking because nervous men always talk. They fill the air with noise, trying to drown out the truth, echoing inside their chests. "You know," Richard said, adjusting his cuffs with theatrical arrogance, "I almost feel bad for you. This was supposed to be educational, a little reminder to know your place." He leaned back. He's performing for his audience like a bored king addressing a peasant child. "Your grandfather was a janitor, right?" His lip curled. "Your mother is a cleaning lady. And here you are pretending to be a poker player. It's pretending you belong at this table." He smirked. "Some people are born to sit at the table. Boy, others are born to clean it." Denise's nails pierced her palm. Blood pooled in crescent shapes. She wanted to scream, to tear across the room and shield her son. But Preston's posturately calm, eerily steady, kept her rooted. He looked like a prophet receiving a message only he understood. Finally, Preston spoke. "My grandfather taught me something about cards." Richard raised an eyebrow. mocking, dismissive. Oh, and what's that? Cards reveal character. The words came out of Preston like steel, wrapped in silk, quiet but unshakable. You've been talking for 5 minutes, Preston continued, insulting my family, telling me what I am and what I'll never be. He paused, letting the silence sharpen the moment. But you haven't looked at my hands once. Richard blinked, confused. A real poker player watches everything, Preston said. Eyes breathing, micro-expressions. The way someone holds their cards, their rhythm, tells. He tilted his head. You've been so busy performing for your friends. You haven't read me at all. Silence pounded through the penthouse. That's how I know you've already lost. Richard's face turned a violent shade of red. His jaw clenched. His hand twitched toward his chips again, the nervous tell, the self-soothing gesture. Even now, even with nothing left to bet, he was rattled. A billionaire, shaken by a 10-year-old boy. Vincent's live stream exploded 75,000 viewers and climbing. The comments were a digital tidal wave. Who is this kid? He's so calm. What the hell? Please tell me the rich guy loses. This kid is built different. Hang that justice on the table. Across the city, a news producer jolted upright in her apartment. Get a camera crew to the Whitmore penthouse. Now. This is going viral. Inside the room, the air shifted. Executives who had mocked Denise minutes ago now stared with fear woven into their fascination. What if the kid actually won? Cleaner in the back made the sign of the cross. James Wilson, a security guard with 40 years of basement poker games in Detroit, stepped forward, voice trembling. Come on, son. Finish it. Behind him, the other cleaners people invisible in this building's hierarchy stood shoulder to shoulder. They had spent their lives scrubbing floors for men like Richard. Tonight, they watched someone fight back for all of them. Eleanor Davis moved closer. Her brain raced. Ghost 12, the shadow player she'd been studying online for months. The impossible reads, the surgical betting patterns, ice-cold patience. It was him. It had to be him, a child. A Harlem kid with taped glasses had been destroying professionals worldwide for 2 years, and none of them had known the monster at the table was a boy. At the far side of the room, Thomas Whitmore set down his untouched whiskey. He stared at his father, sweating, shaking, unraveling, and then at Preston, that calm, composed child wearing dignity like armor. And Thomas felt something foreign burn in his chest. Shame. Shame for the family name. Shame for every cruelty he'd watched his father commit. Shame for the empire built on humiliation. He stepped away from the bar, unable to look at Richard anymore. Denise stood frozen, breath caught in her throat. Her son sat at that table exactly like her father had once sat at his straight-backed, silent, unmovable. All those nights, she thought Preston was falling behind in school. He was learning a different curriculum. One passed down by a dying man who decarved wisdom from a world that never wanted him to win. She should have felt betrayed. But instead, she felt pride swell in her chest until it hurt. Vincent's live stream surged 150,000, 175,000, 200,000 viewers. Chat erupted. This kid is a legend. And still, Preston didn't move, didn't blink, didn't break. A storm was gathering around the table, electric and ancient. For the first time tonight, everyone understood. This wasn't a lesson in knowing your place. This was the moment the world learned the natural order could be rewritten. Rich guy was shaking like Wi-Fi on a mountain. Someone needed to get this man a sponsorship because his dignity had already left the table. Hashtag Hatch Justice was exploding online, trending so fast the algorithm couldn't keep up. Richard Whitmore scanned the room and finally noticed what everyone else had seen an hour ago, the shift. The cleaning staff watched with quiet hope. The security guards nodded with a kind of respect he'd never earned. Even his own son stared at the floor, ashamed to share his bloodline. The audience, both in the penthouse and the 200,000 watching online, had changed sides. And Richard? He had only one card left, literally and figuratively. The executive dealer's hand trembled as he reached for the deck. Final card, he whispered. The river every breath vanished. One card. One moment. One sliver of cardboard between victory and annihilation. The dealer flipped it. 2 of clubs, a blank, a ghost card, completely useless. No help for Richard. No miracle. Nothing. The final board sat there like a death certificate. 4 minus 5, 6, 9, 2. Richard stared at it, his ace-king suddenly looking like trash at a royal banquet. High card. Ace. That's all he had. The worst possible outcome for such a proud starting hand. But Preston? Preston had quietly assembled a smooth, clean, lethal straight 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. For a long moment, the world froze. You could hear the ventilation humming 63 floors below, like it was narrating the moment. Then Preston spoke soft, polite, respectful, straight. 9 high. He revealed the 7 and 8, placing them on the felt, with the gentleness of a kid passing a family heirloom. Richard blinked at the cards, then at the board, then back at the cards again. Confusion gives denial, gives realization, gives, and finally, fear. The kind of fear a man feels when he realizes the world no longer listens to his money. That's not, he stuttered. It's a straight, Eleanor said calmly, stepping closer. He hit it on the turn. The 9. You've been drawing dead for 2 cards. Richard's mouth opened and closed like a broken elevator door. For the first time in his privileged, arrogant life, Richard Whitmore III had no words. Then James started clapping, slow, heavy, each clap echoing like a gunshot in a cathedral. Then Vincent joined, then a cleaner, then another, then another. The applause rose into a tidal wave justice, shaking the crystal chandeliers. The entire internet heard it, and Preston, he didn't smirk, didn't flex, didn't brag. He sat still, calm, humble, powerful. Richard snapped. He swept the table cards flying, chips scattering, crystal glass shattering across marble like his entire reputation collapsing. He cheated. He must have cheated. There's no way 52 cards, Preston said softly. You watched every shuffle, every deal. Your man handled the deck. Every card was face down. No one cheated, Mr. Whitmore. You just lost. Impossible. You're 10. Preston touched his grandfather's watch. My grandpa was 19 when he beat soldiers who thought he was stupid. Age doesn't matter at the table. Only skill, only preparation, only heart. Richard turned for support, but the room had already sentenced him. Executives stared at their shoes. Security looked at the ceiling. Even his own son refused his eyes. He was alone. Completely, devastatingly alone. Denise moved first. She ran to Preston and wrapped her arms around him, shaking with relief. 12 years of humiliation, exhaustion, and sacrifice broke open all at once.
Baby,
she whispered. When did you learn? Grandpa taught me, Preston said softly. Before he died. I promised him I'd play. She cried harder. Now she understood everything: the late nights, the focus, the quiet determination. Her father wasn't gone. He was living through Preston. The elevator hadn't even closed before the internet detonated. Vincent's live stream hit 5WOK gives 1 million gives 2 million in minutes. The clip of Richard's racist taunt, "Your kind can barely count to 10, was everywhere. TikTok, Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, Reddit. Every corner of the digital universe was on fire. Hashtags spread across the internet like wildfire, mutating, multiplying, turning into digital ammunition. Hashtag Hatch Justice, hashtag Poker Prodigy, hashtag Whitmore exposed, hashtag Eyes on Preston Foster by midnight. Every major news network had picked up the story. Billionaire humiliated by 10-year-old in high-stakes poker bet. Scrolled across cable news tickers from New York to Los Angeles. Back in the penthouse, Richard hadn't moved. He sat slumped at the wrecked poker table, staring at the scattered cards like he was watching the ashes of his empire drift away. Eleanor approached him, her heels clicking sharply against the marble. Once, that sound meant obedience, fear, submission. Tonight, it was the sound of justice walking on 2 legs. I've watched you bully people for 5 years, she said, her voice steady and cold enough to freeze glass. The racist comments. The jokes that were never jokes. The way you shrink people just so you can feel tall. She pulled out her phone and showed him the screen. I documented everything. Emails, recordings, witness statements. HR buried Denise's complaint because you told them to. They won't bury this. Richard's head snapped up, eyes wide. You wouldn't dare. I already did, she said. ice in every syllable. The board gets my full report Monday morning. Before he could respond, another figure stepped into the ruined spotlight. Thomas, his son, his heir. His reflection of reflection showed the truth. Dad. Thomas's voice was hollow, cracked open from years of pretending everything was fine. My whole life, you said, winning is everything. Nice guys finish last. Power above all. Crush or be crushed. He looked down at the overturned cups, the broken glass, the scattered chips, a physical portrait of who Richard truly was. But you didn't lose because you were nice. You lost because you were wrong. About people. About the world. About everything that matters. Richard tried to reach for him. Thomas, you don't understand. I understand perfectly. Thomas stepped back like his father's touch was poison. I'm done. Done watching you destroy people. Done being ashamed of my own name. Done pretending cruelty is strength. He walked toward the elevator, paused and glanced back. That kid showed more class in 10 minutes than you've shown in 58 years. He beat you. Still tried to shake your hand. He gave you grace you never deserved. The elevator doors closed. Richard watched the only legacy he truly had disappear behind steel. James, the security guard, stepped forward. Sir, a million people just watched you call a child a racist insult and then lose to him. Lawyers don't fix that kind of thing. Richard spun around, desperate. Someone, anyone, I can pay. But the security guards merely stepped aside. Executives put on their coats like the meeting was over. The cleaning staff stood in quiet, unbreakable solidarity. No one was protecting him anymore. Outside, a crowd had gathered. Phones lit the street like stars, voices rising into a relentless chant. Let him speak, let him speak. Preston and Denise stepped out into the storm of flashing cameras. Reporters surged forward, microphones like spears. Preston, a journalist, yelled, "You just beat one of the wealthiest men in New York. What do you want people to know?" Preston looked at his mother, then at the crowd, then at his grandfather's watch, locked forever at 3:42. My grandfather learned poker in a war, he said, his small voice carrying through the chaos like truth itself. He played in back rooms and basements because those were the only places that let him in. He taught me everything. He paused. Tonight, a man bet against me because of what I look like. He thought he knew my cards by looking at my skin. Preston turned and stared directly into the camera. He was wrong. 1 week later, the world flipped. For Richard Whitmore, the fall was swift, brutal, historic. On Monday, the board held an emergency meeting. Lehner's documentation wasn't just damning, it was a professional obituary. 5 years of harassment complaints, racist remarks, cover-ups, NDAs, HR malpractice. Then 5, then 12. It became an avalanche. By Wednesday, institutional clients began pulling out pension funds for teachers, university endowments, nonprofits with reputations to protect. Every withdrawal letter echoed the same line: we cannot be associated with behavior that violates our values. On Friday, exactly 1 week after the poker game, Richard Whitmore III was forced to resign as CEO of his own family company. 3 generations of power undone in 7 days because he couldn't resist humiliating a cleaning woman and her son. Thomas was appointed interim chairman, his first official action, a public apology, and a full cultural restructuring. Richard's PR team scrambled with damage control, a rushed donation to inner-city youth programs, carefully crafted apology blaming stress, an interview request with a friendly morning show. None of it worked. The world had already chosen its story, and Richard was no longer the narrator. The internet had already made its ruling. Don't be a Whitmore became slang for arrogant self-destruction. His shocked face captured the moment Preston laid down the winning hand, turned into a meme overnight. When you realize the kid you were bullying is actually a genius. When karma shows the receipts, 1 month later, Richard attended a charity gala. The same gala where CEOs once lined up to shake his hand, where politicians laughed too loudly at his jokes, But tonight, he was seated at a back table, beside a potted plant and a silent waiter. No one approached him. No one spoke to him. Whenever he tried to join a conversation, people suddenly remembered somewhere else they needed to be. He left before dessert, alone, forgotten. A ghost wandering through the wreckage of his own making. His empire hadn't cracked, it had evaporated. For Preston, the aftermath felt like stepping into a different universe. 3 days after the video went viral, MIT called, not admissions, the mathematics department. "We have a program for exceptional young minds," the professor said. "Full scholarship when you're ready. But for now, we'd like you at our summer institute. We've never had someone your age. After watching that video, we'd be honored." Next came the World Poker Tour, Youth Ambassador Program. They wanted to chronicle his journey, train him, prepare him. "When you turn 21, they said, we want you at the main event. You see opponents like no one we've ever met." ESPN ran a 30-minute feature. The New York Times printed a front-page profile about William Foster, the grandfather who learned poker in a war and passed down more than just strategy, discipline, courage, mathematics, survival. Morning shows begged for interviews. Talk shows wanted him seated on their couches under hot lights. Through it all, Preston remained. Preston, calm, polite, humble. He never badmouthed Richard, never gloated. In every interview, he wore his grandfather's watch. Eventually, a reporter asked, "Preston, that watch, why do you always wear it?" He looked down at the frozen hands. 3:42. "It belonged to my grandfather," he said softly. "It stopped at 3:42 in the morning. That's the exact minute he died." The interviewer paused. "And you never fixed it? It's not broken." Preston looked up, eyes steady, wise beyond his years. "Reminds me what time it was when he left this world. It reminds me time is precious, that promises matter. It reminds me he's still here every hand I play. He's sitting across from me." Teaching me that clip alone crossed 30 million views in a week. People around the world shared their own stories of grandparents who believed in them, of promises made in small rooms, of legacies carried quietly through generations. But Preston didn't care about fame. He cared about purpose. 6 months after the poker game, he launched something that changed everything. Grandpa's Table, a free after-school program in Harlem. No registration fees, no barriers. Just folding tables, plastic chips, and worn decks of cards. But poker wasn't the curriculum. Probability was game theory, critical thinking, emotional discipline, decision-making under pressure. The same skills William Foster learned in a war. The same skills he passed to his grandson. 12 kids came the first week, then 20, then 40. Soon they needed a bigger building. Denise quit her cleaning job to run the program full-time. After 12 years of scrubbing floors for people who never saw her, she finally woke up each day doing work that mattered. James Wilson, the security guard, volunteered as an instructor. He taught the kids games from Detroit, the ones that sharpened instinct and memory. His grandchildren became regulars. Eleanor Davis left corporate life. She published an expose titled What I Saw, 5 Years of Silent Complicity. It went viral. Today, she consults companies on fixing toxic cultures. On weekends, she helps at Grandpa's Table. Thomas Whitmore quietly funds the program. No credit, no headline. He's in therapy, rebuilding himself piece by piece. He hasn't spoken to his father in months. One Saturday afternoon, Preston stood in front of a community center classroom. 20 kids, black, brown, white, rich, poor, sat around folding tables, cards in hand. Kids nobody expected anything from, kids who reminded him of himself. So, he said, if there's $100 in the pot and you need to bet $20 to stay in, you need at least a 20% chance of winning for the math to work. How do we figure that out? Hands shot up, answers flew. Laughter filled the room. Advanced mathematics disguised as play. A small boy in the front, the same taped glasses Preston used to wear, the same quiet determination, raised his hand. Preston, what do we do when people say we're not smart enough for this stuff? Preston walked over, knelt to eye level. Then, he said, you invite them to sit down. He reached into his pocket, pulled out a single card, the ace of spades. And you show them exactly what you're holding. The boy took the card, smiled, understood. Behind them hung a framed, Photograph William Foster in military uniform, holding the same deck of cards he once used to win 6 months' wages from men who underestimated him. Below it, a hand-painted sign. The cards don't lie. People do. Trust the math. Trust your eyes. William Foster, 1932 to 2020. Preston touched his grandfather's watch. 3:42. The promise wasn't just kept. It had grown into something bigger than a boy, bigger than a game, bigger than a victory. Every kid who entered that room learned what Preston had learned. Circumstances don't define potential. Skin color doesn't measure intelligence. A zip code doesn't predict destiny. 52 cards, everyone gets the same deal. What do you do with them? That's your story. Richard Whitmore wanted to teach the world who belonged at the table and who belonged cleaning it. He was right. A lesson was taught that night, just not the one he expected. A 10-year-old boy from Harlem walked into that penthouse invisible and walked out unforgettable. And somewhere in that frozen moment, at 3:42, William Foster finally took his rightful seat at the table. Fate Tales OUTRO, as requested, if you believe in stories like this, where brains beat money, where the underdog wins, and where justice finally shows up, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell. Share this with someone who needs to hear it today. Like, share, and subscribe to Fate Tales.